Welcome back. It doesn't matter what seems to happen. It doesn't matter what you do. In the strongest possible sense. It has no importance whatever. Yoga is not about what happens, it's about what it is. This is what it is. That's the important fact. That's the important condition. What it seems to look like is of no importance whatsoever. So you're free to pursue trying to navigate through it, to have it look however you prefer. That's fine. But you don't gain or lose anything important because of that. The only thing that matters is what it is. And this is why the essence of yoga is exploring what this is, not what it looks like. Which is, of course, very different than the normal human mode, where we're very used to being very concerned about what seems to happen. And we have absolutely no importance to what it is. What it is, the fact of experiencing is just taken for granted. It's just like a clear window through which we're watching what's happening, which is an important part. As if you're watching a TV show and you don't care about the TV, you didn't want to see the show. You're interested in what happens in the show, what's going to go on there. You don't sit there looking at the TV. You are actually doing nothing but looking at the TV. And likewise with this, we're conditioned, we spent all our lives looking at what seems to be happening, and we've typically ignored what it is made of, how it's appearing. The fact of experiencing is completely ignored, and what seems to be experienced is completely attended to. And in fact, what matters is exactly the opposite, 180 degrees the other way. But what it is the only thing that matters. What it looks like has no importance whatsoever. So yoga is not about what you do or don't do. It's always about seeing what it is. And it is what it is, regardless of what you're doing. So whatever you're doing is the perfect vehicle for investigating what it is. You don't need to wait until some special conditions are happening in order to do investigation. You know, you're in the bathroom on the John, perfect time to investigate. You're sitting in meditation, perfect time to investigate. You're out having a beer with friends, perfect time to investigate. You're driving in traffic getting really pissed off at the other drivers, perfect time to investigate. It's always the perfect time because it's always what it is. It's always this. It never changes one iota. Oh.
So the method of investigation that I tend to usually get drawn to is whatever I'm doing, like driving or whatever, just examining, putting my attention on kind of my sensorial experience of the clutch and the gas pedal and all of that. Is there an even sort of more subtle or sensitive way to explore that, to explore what's going on?
Yeah, look at how it's appearing.
I guess
how is there a clutch? How is there a you to put your foot on the clutch? How is there anything?
I guess what I'm
So looking at your bodily sensations instead of looking at, say, the traffic or your emotional reactions or something is neither here nor there. The question is, how is any of it appearing? So the question is, the interesting question that yoga addresses is, what is experience? or experience can be said to be maybe more of a verb than a noun, if you like. So what is experiencing? What is it? Here it is. What is it? That's all that's ever happening, whether you're driving or sitting here talking or sleeping or... What is it? What is this that is occurring here? It's totally independent of what it looks like. It only looks like anything because the experiencing is occurring. So what is that? What would you look for experiencing? Anywhere. Experiencing is not something separate than what's being experienced. Like the TV show is not separate from the TV. When you look at the show, you're actually looking at the TV. You're just distracted. You're not thinking that you are because you're thinking you're seeing a show. There's no show there. There's just a TV. And the TV, by its very nature, has all these flashing colors and sounds and stuff. But there's no show. It's just a TV. Likewise here, there's nothing happening. It's just experiencing. Or when you dream at night, which is just another word name for experience, there's nothing happening. It's just dreaming. And it might look like something, it might look like nothing, in which case we say, oh, I didn't dream last night, I was just asleep. But it's the same. It doesn't matter what it looks like, it doesn't matter what seems to happen, it's what it is that's important. And it always is what it is, so check it out. Yes.
Our dreams come because events that happened that day or before, something, so they are real and they are connected with what we lived before, what was engraved in our brain.
Well, that's the theory. It seems to be that way, but we can't know. We think things happen for causes. If something happens, we think something caused it from before and so on. But all of that is just a theory. It's an idea. We don't really know why things happen or how things happen or how they seem to be interrelated. Oh, hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Of course not.
Okay. I wrote it down so I could get it right. So, when I experience myself as the center of all that is, and I realize that I am literally not separate from everything and everyone in my experience, it makes me feel a great responsibility for everything. And I know that I'm responsible for my ego story and how I feel about myself and the whole story around that. But I get confused when I start expanding out into people in my life, my community, state of California, what's going on in the world, and how that's coming into my experience. And so it's part of me in some way, but am I responsible for it?
Yeah, you're completely responsible for it, but there's nothing to be responsible for. You're responsible for what happens everywhere in the same sense that you're responsible for what appears in your dream. But since it's just a dream, there's not much responsibility involved. It doesn't matter what happens.
So then where is our power in that, knowing that, if it's coming into our experience, with law of attraction and things like this, that somehow it's a part of us and we're somehow responsible for some part of that.
You're responsible for all of it. There is no law of attraction. What is doing everything is what you really are. So why are these light bulbs shining light? They're plugged into the wall, there's electricity and there's switches, and the electricity comes from generators somewhere which are spinning around, drawing electricity out of the static field of the electric field of the earth, which itself is embedded in the electric field of the solar system, which is itself embedded in the electric field of the galaxy. So that's why that's coming from these lights. And what's doing it is the nature of actuality, the nature of the galaxy, the nature of the Earth, the nature of the electrical field, all of which is one nature, it's one system. And what's doing you is that same system. So what you really are is that system. You're not you. And so what's making these lights shine is you. Just like what's making you stand here thinking these thoughts you're thinking is you. What's making me sit here and talk is you. Because you are the system that's doing everything. You're not a separate entity. It's not like the system of, let's say let's call it the biosphere of the Earth. So the biosphere of the Earth is here. It's not like you popped out of it and you're separate from it. You're an outgrowth of it. You are the biosphere. You're what the biosphere looks like right there. So you're the biosphere, so you're doing everything the biosphere is doing, which is everything all life forms are doing, which is being done by, the biosphere itself is being done by, let's say, the field of physics of the whole solar system in the galaxy. So you're that. That's what's really doing you. That's what's really doing everything. And that's what you are. You can't find yourself as a separate thing that's somehow cut off from that. You are an outgrowth of that. And as an outgrowth, you are that. The light bulb that's lit, the electricity that's going through that's making it shine, is one continuum that's connected with all electricity and all the wires that goes all the way back to the generator. It's one flow of electricity. It's not separate from it. It doesn't stop being that flow. So you have a separate light bulb and then electricity in the walls over there. It's one continuum. And the generators are generating by pulling the electricity out of the static field of the Earth. So again, the electricity that's lighting that light bulb is one with the entire static field of the Earth. And the static field of the Earth is embedded in the static field of the solar system. So what's lighting that light bulb is one with the entire static field of the solar system. You see where this is going? So you're not a separate being responsible for other separate things. There is a continuum which includes everything, which is doing everything, which is what you really are. Just like the power of that light bulb is really the electrical field of the galaxy.
So it feels like all I can do is accept what is, because there's not really anything I can do to change it.
Right. And even if you don't accept it, it still is what it is.
Right, but then where is our power in being effective in the world that we live in as an individual ego? If we know that, I can conceptualize that I'm not separate from all that is, but I also am in this body experiencing this reality, and feel that there is purpose in doing things that, in my life feel good.
Sure.
And, hopefully feel good to the people around me. But then I feel this responsibility for also the things I don't want in my experience, and I don't know how to relate to those things.
Well, you're free to try to pursue the things you value and to enact the things you think are important or beautiful or valuable. And you're free to try to work against those things that you think or that you don't agree with, and so on and so forth. You're free to do all that. But even as you do all that, you're not a separate being doing that. You aren't a separate being. You're not an ego. The ego is just a subsystem of what you are. Like your little finger is a subsystem of what you are. Are you your little finger? Sure, I'm my little finger, but I'm not just my little finger. My little finger is a subsystem of me. Am I this whole body? Sure, I'm this whole body. Am I this whole field of experience? Sure, I'm this whole field of experience. So this is a subsystem of the field of experience. This is a subsystem of the field of experience. This is a subsystem of the field of experience. And that's what I am. And you are too.
So you don't believe in the law of attraction?
I don't know what it is, so probably not.
You don't know what it is.
No. But I don't believe in anything, so that's pretty easy to say. Probably not.
Yeah, the last time I came down here to see you, you weren't here for some reason. It made me wonder if you existed.
I know it's always a dilemma. When you don't see someone, do they exist? You can't answer that question, can you?
I was like, where is he? He doesn't exist.
I might not have existed at that point. Who
I don't
knows?
think you did, so it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you. I'm glad you came down. I was thinking of you just this morning.
To have this illusion.
Yeah.
So may I add something?
Of course.
So in a certain way, I was scared that if it's only the present, is right now, we are acting like a dog. He doesn't care what happened yesterday or what is going to happen tomorrow, but he just responds to events that the door is slammed or someone else and he barks or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, but we are much more than that.
Well, we express our nature in the moment. So what you do in the moment depends upon who you are, and who you are includes all of the influences and all of the memories of what you've experienced, all of which is right here, right now.
And following what she said about the others. So it will be hard to think that we are so egotistic. Just we think about me, and the other things happen around me, but I cannot do anything.
Well, no, you can do everything you can do. You're free to do anything. You're free to, be benevolent. You're free to try and help people. You're free to, behave well in a way that is for benefit of yourself and others. You're free to do all of that. It's not a matter of egotistical. It's a matter of recognizing the nature of what you actually are. Egotistical is partializing yourself. So if I'm egotistical, I'm partializing myself and saying, there's me here and I'm what's important. And you're not important. That's not true. What I am is important. What everything is important. But what I recommend is try to investigate what is here, what is this that's important, and then you can understand it better. Mm-hmm. People, we think we know what's happening, and because it's in accordance with what we've been taught, what the people around us seem to be doing, but maybe they're not so right. Maybe they've been misled. Maybe there's a lot of sloppy thinking and superstition in what people believe, and in what they teach each other and teach their children and all that. So this is a matter of investigating that, trying to look for yourself, discover for yourself as best you can, sort of correct any errors that may be in your understanding of things as best you can. Can't do more than that.
Didn't you say then the sense of control arises in us? There's not really, we don't have control. We're being moved by this. There's not a separate person really making all the choices.
Well, I think there's not any separation,
Mhm,
but whether or not there's control is an interesting question.
mhm.
I mean, how does what seems to happen? Don't know. It seems participatory. It seems like I can do this or that. And if I investigate it, can I pin down exactly that I am doing it or not? We can't answer any of those questions.
Mhm.
But still, if it seems participatory, I can be free to try to participate with it. And if it seems like I can have any directing of it, I'm free to try and explore that. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it really is that or not. It's just a matter of, different ways of interfacing with your life. And, I think it's self-evident that there is a sense of participation, and of course, we're free to engage in that. And, whether or not it actually is control is more of a philosophical issue. It's not really a practical issue. You can't really tell what it is. So since you can't really ever answer the question, it's not really worth asking. I think.
Mhm. Well, I think it's when I look at our world and all that's happening, when it's all one, and there's no really person to blame in it. There's
Right.
It's all
There isn't.
being moved mysterious.
Sure. The system enacts itself. Why are humans humans? Well, nature made that. Biosphere made that. Life forms DNA evolved into humans because of its nature. So we're being enacted by the nature of DNA. You might argue, let's suppose. So who's to blame for that? Well, DNA. Well, where's DNA come from? Well, DNA is an artifact of the nature of the structure of matter, of atoms. Atoms can form DNA, so they did. And DNA can form life forms, so it does. So you want to point the finger at anything, point the finger at the nature of atoms. Why are atoms the way they are? Again, you see where this goes.
Yeah, I'm sitting there a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's false too.
Yeah, but none of that has an implication, really. The fact that you can't tell what's going on ultimately doesn't mean you're not free to participate in it to whatever extent it seems participatory.
Mhm. Well, I'd add in that, and what I notice my sense of controller is when I think it's personal, and when I investigate this isn't really personal.
Right.
Yeah. And that's when I notice it's almost like I can feel my body like I'm on a roller coaster and it's about to go down. So I feel it clutch.
Yeah.
But I don't know why it's doing that. It's kind of gripping, but I don't know why. Like it's kind of getting used to letting go, relaxing into it all.
Yeah.
But then it's like gripping sometimes. And I
Yeah,
don't
sure.
know what the fear, it's like it doesn't know what's next.
Yeah. Well, that's the nature of the way your energy system functions at this point in your evolution and your unfoldment.
Mm-hmm.
And as if you look at your evolution, you'll notice it continually evolves, it continually changes. So whatever you're working with now is going to move into whatever that looks like in the future.
Yeah.
And then you'll be asking different sets of questions.
I know, it never ends. I think I was listening to you yesterday on the YouTube, which you just showed up on my phone. I just came in touch with you for John. And what came to me was personal. I just noticed when things are personal,
Yeah.
I'm super sensitive to emotions.
Sure.
It contracts me. So
Right.
It's been amazing to investigate taking things personally is this interesting discovery.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's actual, it's happening, but if you look very closely at what's happening, it's strange, it's peculiar. It doesn't turn out to be as simple as it seems to be if you don't look into it.
Yeah, and that sense of the other doing this or going there. I think it's just the sense of the other is a very fascinating
Yeah.
phenomena.
Yeah, it is. It's very fascinating.
Relationship. And
Yeah, it's amazing.
it is. It's incredible. Yeah.
So then it feels like we don't really have any control over what's going on. Like, even if I'm sitting outside, I can't control the birds and the butterflies and the bees. I can only breathe and see what is.
Mhm.
So I don't really have control. There's no control. Like, that seems like an illusion. Maybe we might be able to control our reaction to something if we're present. But ultimately, we don't have control over our life or what's going on around us or other people, how they treat us. And it seems to me that the only control that I have is in my interpretation of the experience. So I can either see it as interesting or strange, or I can see it way more personal than that. And then continue to separate myself further from that experience and create more solidity between self and other. So it's almost like someone yesterday said something about feeling like they're disassociating. Well, I feel that way often, like I'm kind of expanding out from my personal sense of self into this kind of disassociated place where all of the experience is blurring between myself and other, and it's all light and sound, and and it gets more and more interesting. But then I also start to think maybe there's also a way in which you can go into it where you become more connected to everything. And
But you're not necessarily less or more connected, it just looks different. So, in other words, in experience, there's all these different sorts of perspectives that you can seem to appear. And to some degree, you may be able to navigate through them or orient to them. So I can really be in my senses, or I can really be with my imagination, or I can really be with sort of the background of my experience, the sort of, subtle, deep flavors and moods or whatever. We don't have words for what that is. And nothing is disassociated from anything else because it's all continuous. It's not like that part is separate from this part. It's all a continuum. It's like the earth is here, and then the air is here, and then the upper atmosphere is there, and then the space is here. It's all a continuum. The space isn't separate from the earth. The space is what the earth looks like at that point. And the earth is what space looks like at this point. It's all a continuum that includes itself. So all these different perspectives of our experience, different textures, say different densities, sensory and personal, or more, let's say less, whatever, however you want to put it, less defined, the more open, more inclusive, whatever, is just a different perspective on the same thing. It's all what experience can look like from different perspectives. But it's not necessarily dissociated because it's not actually separated from any of the other perspectives.
So how do you hold that all at once?
You don't need to. It's just here. You don't need to hold it. It holds
So
itself.
do you just, like, it just doesn't matter whether you're in your body and feeling something in your body or in your mind? And
Doesn't really matter. So you're free to do what you think is important. If you're interested in really focusing on your senses, you're free to do so. If you're interested in really thinking about something, you're free to do so. If you're interested in imagining something, you're free to do so. If you're interested in going into some deep meditation, you're free to do so. And you don't lose, just because you're paying attention to one perspective doesn't mean you lose the other perspectives. Your senses are always here. You can always come to pay attention to them anytime you want. Deep meditation is always here. You can always pay attention to it anytime you want. Imagination is always here. You can always pay attention to it anytime you want. It's a matter of, so you would say, tuning into these different perspectives. But they're different perspectives on you, on your experiential field, which includes itself. It's not, no part of it is actually separate from any other part.
It almost seems like it's just a really subtle shift in how we think about things. But it happens in every single moment.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something you realize one day and then
Right.
forever changed. It's like,
Yeah.
it's constantly changing.
Yeah,
And
constantly
it
changing.
just seems to me like all we can do is accept what is, but that's all we can actually do.
Sure.
Accept whatever it is.
Sure.
And just realize we don't have control over it.
Well, but when you accept what it is, whether you accept it or not, you're forced to accept it because that is what it is. It is what it is, but even if you don't accept it. So it's a done deal. So you may as well accept it. But again, it's not that you don't necessarily don't have control. It feels participatory, so you're free to try to do what you can do to the extent it feels like you can do it. You're free to try and make decisions. You're free to try and do this instead of that. You're free to try and whatever. And then whether or not you're actually doing control or it just seems like that is just philosophy, so who cares?
Right, but it seems to me that there's like almost like a scale of moving towards like solidifying duality and the sense of separation
Sure.
versus accepting what is.
Sure.
And feeling more interested and
Sure.
open and
Yeah.
less, caught up on control and what's not working out. So
Sure.
It does seem like there's a scale
Sure.
between accepting or not accepting,
Sure.
solidifying.
Sure, and you're free to be with that scale however you're able to do so.
But you're saying ultimately it doesn't really matter.
Of course it doesn't, because it is what it is, whatever you think it is. You are whatever you think you are, but you're free to try to see yourself more clearly, as you do, otherwise you wouldn't be here, and explore these issues to try to come to accept the way it actually is. Because what the acceptance is not just some acceptance of some bullshit. It's accepting what things really are, seeing it more clearly. So it's not really accepting so much as seeing.
And what's the benefit to that?
The benefit of that is not being crazy. You can think things are some way that they aren't, and you're just another crazy person. Which, of course, is not a big deal because that's what most people are. I mean, we're all very familiar with that, and we ourselves are all crazy, so again, we're all familiar with that. But it's possible to be more clear. It's possible to be less crazy, which may bring clarity. It may bring some kind of a peace. It may bring some kind of a better functioning. It may bring some kind of a relaxation. You know, it may have nice qualities to it that feel valuable.
You know, and like Rumi said that beyond the field of right doing and wrongdoing, well, beyond the ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. I feel like where you're pointing to, like, you know, some people, I've heard some people listen to your talk and say that, okay, that he's always pointing towards meaninglessness. Like everything is meaningless. And what I say is, like, I think what Peter's doing is pointing you to a place that's beyond idea of a meaningful or a meaningless, beyond good or bad, and that's a place that can't really be put into words.
Yeah. I'm pointing beyond human meaningfulness or meaninglessness. I'm pointing to the true meaning of what it actually is, which is the only true meaningfulness. In other words, it doesn't mean what you think it does. It means what it is. So instead of thinking it's this or that, discover what it is, and then you'll know the meaning.
Right. So my question, I guess, is that there's obviously no way to characterize it using dualistic language. So to think
or using non-dualistic language.
Yeah.
Probably even especially.
Yeah. So anytime somebody says, "Oh, you know, that it's got a certain flavor," that's not it. Like it's got a flavor of existentialism, or it's got a flavor of nihilism, or it's got a flavor of meaninglessness or meaningfulness.
No.
It's always beyond that.
Always, it's beyond any philosophy. It's beyond any human conceptualization. So therefore, obviously beyond any philosophy, beyond anything that can be said or thought. But it's not nothing. It is what it is. So even though you can't say it or think it, you can know it because you are it. I mean, this is the great secret of yoga. What you're trying to explore and discover, you already are. Since you are it, you have access to it. Even though it's inconceivable, you're the same inconceivable. So you have the ability to recognize it just by your being it. You don't need to model it or conceive of it or draw a map of it, which is what conceptualization is. You're just to have the thing itself because you are the thing itself, so you can engage with it on the level of what it is, of what you are. And that's yoga.
Seems like what we're talking about here is just tell me if I'm on the right track here, is like a training in seeing or being not afraid of uncertainty and unresolvability.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be what at least I'm seeing as maybe a block, because I don't want to fully go there because there's been I don't know, fear, I don't know, with non-existence or not having anywhere to stand.
Sure. And you could describe it like that, sure. You know, training and not being afraid of it or being comfortable with it. But you do that not by trying to develop a fearlessness, but more by seeing that it's actual, it already is that, and you're sitting right here, there's nothing to be afraid of. So since it already is that, obviously there is nothing to fear, because it's not like it's something over there that you're avoiding.
Yeah.
It's already got you, so to speak.
Yeah.
You already are.
The fear is about what could happen or what or won't happen. You know, the end of me, I guess. You know, which is nothing happening now, but
But since what it is already happened, how scary can it be? I mean, it's no more scary than you sitting here.
it's already happened.
Yeah.
I'm already dead, kind of thing. Or?
No, it's already unresolvable.
Okay.
It's already ambiguous. So the degree to which you come to see that, you see, oh, you know, well, wow, this kind of is that already. And is there anything here to be scared of? Is there anything here that's like particularly problematic? And it's like, no, I'm just hanging out. Everything's okay. And then, so, you know, the more clearly you see that, then you realize the fearfulness is not really of the unresolvability. It's of fantasies that you suppose it to be, which it itself isn't really, because it itself is already right here.
Yeah. Right.
So even fear of death would be that sense of fear of an unknown or fear of loss of me, or
Well, you're not afraid of death. You're afraid of a fantasy of what you think death is.
yeah,
You can't know what death is.
Mhm.
You know, the only person that knows what death is the dying person, or better yet, the dead person. If you're afraid of death, you're afraid of what you're afraid that it might be, which of course is a fantasy. And all fantasies deviate from actuality because actuality is unimaginable.
it's nothing that we could make up, imagine.
Of course, how can you imagine anything? Anything you imagine is less than the thing itself and different than the thing itself. You know, you imagine what your experience is going to look like 5 minutes from now, you're going to be wrong, period. 100%. Imagine what's happening right now, you're going to be wrong, 100%, because it's unimaginable. And so death, it's like, how can you possibly know? So the actuality of death is an unknown. And maybe it's something that would be worth being afraid of or not, but you can't even know that until it happens. You know, when you're just dying, in that very instant of dying, you may say, boy, I should have been terrified of this, it's horrible. But you can't know that until it happens. Or maybe the other way around. Maybe you go, oh my God, this is wonderful. What was I worried about all this time? How can you know? You can't know one way or the other. All you can know is the present instant. And you can't pin down what it is. But it already is what it is. You have it, you are it. So you don't need to pin it down.
So just to add, we always think that, if we die, we are going to transform in something else.
Mhm.
So that's an idea.
Mm-hmm.
But we always hope that it's going to be better.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
So I think hope is very important in order to maintain some sanity. We hope that things are going to turn well for at work and the family, in the work, whatever it is. So is that hope something wrong? Something?
No, it's not wrong. It's, I would say rather than hope, it's a wish. It's a benevolent wish that things will be well. But sometimes they aren't. Sometimes things are difficult. Sometimes other things happen. And in that case, we adjust to that. And then we still wish for them to be better. So it's a matter of being with the way it actually is while you wish for it to be as well as it can be. And maybe you wish for it to be as well as it can be if you can, if it's something you can work with.
So wish and hope are related?
Yeah, they're basically the same thing. If I say, I hope that tomorrow will be better than today, I hope politics gets better, I hope wars stop. What I really mean is I wish they would stop. I want them to. And maybe they won't. Probably they won't, right? Human nature being what it is. But still, I can want that. I can want that. I can work for that if I want. I can, in whatever way I can.
I believe that my whole life was based on hopes.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. You want things to be what you think is good, and you orient towards that, and you work for that, and that's wonderful. Of course, you work for what you think is valuable. Work for what you think has value, is good, is beautiful. But sometimes things don't work out the way you hope, and then you have to work with the reality of what it is, still trying to move towards what you wish it to be.
So what happened with the living the moment? I
Yes.
don't need to think about the future. So
No.
let's take out the hope because
Because in the moment you will do what you think is for the best, and that leads to the best future. If right in this moment I behave the way that I think is good, then that itself leads to, as much as it can, leads to a good future. See what I mean? Because the only time you can ever do anything is right now, in the moment, of course. So all of your actions happen in the moment. And if all of your actions are expressing your hopes, expressing your wishes, for, let's say, benevolent wishes, then all of your actions will be moving in that direction. You can't act in the future and you can't act in the past. Because, of course, all action takes place now, obviously.
Peter, it's interesting that it seems in my experience that recognizing the equalness of everything, all experience as being beyond definition, beyond resolvability, that in a sense it's and you speak about it sometimes of kind of seeing through the conventional notion of hierarchy, of this is somehow better than that, preferable to that in some sense. But it's interesting because it seems that, we'll call it preferences seem to remain, which I might describe as sort of what I value in a sense.
Sure.
But it's just kind of a curiosity that seems to remain, even though there's also a recognition of we could say the equalness of everything, which is sort of non-hierarchical, or it's not like this is more valuable than that.
Sure.
yeah, it's just,
Sure.
I don't know if that's, it's like, I use this example sometimes, it's like, well, really fundamentally, getting a massage is the same as having somebody hit me, with a hammer over the head. But I have a preference for the massage, right? Why? They're equal.
Yeah.
And I don't have to have an answer to that question, but it seems to be the case. That movement towards something that
Yeah. But
the
this,
organism values or finds beneficial
Yeah.
or pleasurable or.
yeah, this gets into the mystery of karma. We talked about that a bit yesterday. The reason, or let's say the fact that things seem to be the way they seem to be, in particular, even though they aren't really that way. So you are what you are. You seem to be the entity that you seem to be, even though if you look very closely at that entity, you can't actually find it or resolve it. And yet, nonetheless, you seem to be that way. And the entity that you are would rather get a massage than be hit by a hammer. Some other entity might prefer the hammer. This is why people are all different, because they are all different, and so their nature enacts itself. People, I do what a being that was exactly like me would do in these circumstances. In the same circumstances, you would do something different, maybe, because you're a different being. So karmically, you have the nature of the way you seem to be, in particular, notwithstanding the fact that you can't find what that nature is, and you can't resolve that nature as to a particular, and yet, here you are.
Right. Right, and as you were, it's now kind of occurring to me that I've seen this happen before, where these like little subtle kind of questions they're an opportunity to kind of see once again that there is no dichotomy.
Yeah.
That what I would describe as hierarchy, equalness of everything is not a dichotomy from valuing one thing over another.
Absolutely.
They're
Absolutely.
not two things.
Yeah. The particular and the universal are one. Even though the particular is what it is and isn't other than what it is, and the universal is everything. Paradox. Right. Absolute specificity and absolute indeterminacy are one and the same thing. So all experiential patternings are precisely what they are, and that precision of what they are is entirely unresolvable.
Right. And so like chocolate is specifically chocolate and not vanilla as a quality, experiential quality.
Yeah, and you can't find chocolate.
I can't find either one.
Yeah.
But it doesn't negate the difference.
Right, exactly. Because it's not an either or.
Right.
And this is a perfect and perhaps the cardinal illustration of the irrationality and weirdness of this actuality. Is that it exists in contradictory conditions by its very nature. It's exactly a certain way and it's no way all at once. No way to make sense of that. It's gibberish. It's nonsense. It's totally absurd. And yet, it actually is like that. So I'm exactly who I am, and I'm everything and nothing in particular. Try and make sense of that.
But it's funny. It sounds contradictory, but it's exactly like what the experience seems like or feels like.
It's true.
Like both.
The contradiction is only in the analysis, right? Because the analysis is in terms of distinctive concepts, this or that, yeah. Which doesn't exist in reality. There is no distinction in reality. Just reality is both and. Reality is not this or that. There's no or in reality. There's a re in reality, but no or. Personality in reality, but no or. I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges in spiritual investigation is the differentiating nature of human language. Human language is based upon drawing distinctions. An apple is not a saw, and a saw is not an apple. A car is not a rock, and a rock is not a car. So that's the structure of language, and hence the structure of thought, since we tend to think in terms of words. But reality is not like that. In reality, an apple is a saw. A saw is an apple. So, a large part of yoga is being able to experience one's experience outside of the context of this conceptual framework, which is so heavily shaped by this differentiating dichotomous symbol system that we use to express ourselves.
But it almost seems those differentiating mechanisms seem, in some sense, pre-verbal and pre-conceptual too. I mean,
Sure.
The room seems, and all the apparent objects in the room seem differentiated, just automatically.
But see, differentiation is actual. But what's the word? But distinction is not. The experiential field is infinitely differentiated within itself. In other words, any portion of the experiential field, what appears in that field, in that point, is absolutely different than every other portion of the experiential field. So if you look at your visual field, what I see right there, everywhere else I see something different. In terms of color, in terms of brightness, in terms of whatever the visual characteristics are. The same with any of the sense fields, the same with thought fields, the same with extrasensory, extra thought fields, the same with blah, blah, blah. Every aspect of the field is infinitely differentiated within itself. And yet, in that infinite differentiation, it doesn't depart from itself. It is just this one thing, this one field that is here. So again, you have this paradoxical nature of an infinite differentiation, but no difference. There's no this or that. So language uses this infinite differentiation to arbitrarily create the illusion of a this and a that. So this tanka here, even though every aspect of it is infinitely different than every other aspect of it in my visual field, in my imagination, I can draw an outline around it, an imaginary outline, and say everything inside that outline is one thing, and everything outside that outline is not that one thing. But that's in the imagination, that's verbally, that's that tanka or not the tanka. But experientially, it's one exclusive field. And the field includes everything else in the field of vision. That portion of the field includes that portion of the field. This dot of paint includes the dot of paint next to it. It's all one exclusive continuum. So experience is an exclusive continuum of infinite differentiation. Language can't deal with that. Language wants it to be one or many. And there is no one or many. There's infinite manyness and absolute oneness, which are the same thing.
Right. Yeah, it's like differentiation, but when you look experientially, you can't find lines.
Yeah, there's no separation.
You literally cannot find. There's no line there.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
Yeah, there's no line, there's no break.
There's no break. But everything appears different.
Yeah, infinite differentiation, infinite. And the more the more you find. You take one tiny, tiny, tiny portion of the visual field and look at that up close, and within that tiny portion, there's still infinite differentiation. And you take a tiny portion of that, and you look closer at that. There's still infinite differentiation. It's literally infinite. It's not just metaphorically infinite or poetically infinite. It's literally infinite. In other words, you can always find more. And yet, it's one thing that doesn't depart from itself. You know, bizarre, weird, effing weird. And human thought and human language can't deal with that.
Right, so we experience what we would think of as ourselves or the body mind as differentiated from the rest that isn't that.
Exactly, all that.
And yet you cannot
find any
one
such.
ends and the other begins.
Yeah, exactly. There's no break. There's no actual boundaries or outlines. There's no end. Infinite means literally no end. So your body doesn't have an end. Your body doesn't have an outline around it. Because experience is an infinite inclusive continuum. And experience is actual, it's real. Nothing else is actual, nothing else is real. So infinite inclusive continuum is what is real. There are no separate things, there are no separate parts. Those are abstractions. They're arguments. Shall we take a 5-minute break?
Sure.
Let's sprint.
All we're gonna be holy.
I have to do something.
Still there, but
That sounds good. I don't want, I think all the chairs are used. So, I just won't move as much. How's that?
It's so complicated. It's easy to get stuck on.
What's your name?
agreed.
Salt.
We all like driving down that same highway.
Hey, Charlie, can I get your phone number? Yeah. Let me text you, is that cool?
Yeah.
Might be.
Yeah, here. I think I've actually got yours in my phone.
Oh, you do? Okay, hit me.
Center of my own universe. This is all my experience. Another thing.
Where did it come from? How did it get in my experience?
Uh-huh.
It's not part of who I am.
I don't live, I used to live.
Oh, perfect, got it, thanks.
Never get a straight answer.
No, I gotta call
Whenever
her
you make a
again.
mistake, we'll say the opposite.
And it's constantly long thing.
After I ask a question, I'm often more confused.
have. I'm often more confused than I was before.
Well, you have, I'm you.
We're all familiar with each other. We all know who we really are. Aw, we're all playing around. It doesn't. Well, so then we have to. It's out on the south.
We're thinking about doing like a little dinner at our place.
Okay, cool. Today?
Isn't that what?
No, no.
Oh, all right.
April,
In April sometime.
Nice.
Friday, Friday.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
That's pretty unique, I
On April Friday.
I get that a lot. People don't know me.
You have a lot of your Fridays are like dinners already.
Yeah, I feel
That-
familiar.
With boss, yeah.
Familiar story, but it's not true. Like you've never met me. None of it's true. Yes, yeah. If you hang around this in the night, then you know me. You know that place, so this is why. Our I know. I know.
I couldn't believe I.
The wave is moving, so. You're. Yeah. To express themselves, to figure out their needs. Yeah. Okay, wait for that. Is there only one?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was actually going to send a message a few days ago. If you ever want to like this Skype, it's kind of quiet people a little bit. I don't know. You might, I think you might be interested.
Yeah, it was good. That was cool.
Yeah. You know, so especially since you got into the book a little bit, it might be fun. Just like
See what comes
see
up.
what comes up.
Yeah,
Let me know.
sounds cool.
Yeah,
For
I'm
sure.
happy to do it anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Fun
to
fun
talk
stuff,
about
huh?
this stuff.
That's, even if they can't be talked about.
Yeah, well, you know, that's the fun
It's-
part.
Exactly. It's still delicious, right?
Yeah, yeah, especially like this, you know, when I tell my friends to watch him, and like they take a certain kind of interpretation, it's like, oh, I don't know if I like the whole like using this aspect of it.
That's a very common,
Yeah.
common interpretation.
Yeah.
Speaking personally. They think my dad's like, because my dad's really
No,
interested in
no,
all this stuff.
it's,
It's like,
I mean,
it sounds really nihilistic to you. And I said,
Awesome.
well, that's nihilism's a philosophy, Dad. This is not philosophy. Nihilism is drawing a certain conclusion about
Yeah.
understanding things. You know, it's-
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's an
yeah.
intellectual.
That's a good point. I like that. Yeah.
But the feeling of it is also the same. So
Yeah, yeah.
nihilism is a philosophy.
I like
No,
the
nothing
thing that
matters
you
is a
said
philosophy.
about it's a conclusion drawn
Yeah.
based on unresolvability, but like,
It's not really what. It's like, no, it's like you're still going to be inclined to do what you value, what you wrong, what you're interested in. Like, that doesn't stop. And if
Yeah.
it does stop, then it does stop.
yeah,
Then that's what that's your karma.
Yeah.
But or how you call it. But it's not. But people hear that, and because we're like so kind of. We're so tied in with the notion of meaning from a human perspective
mhm,
that it's almost like deconstructed. And we think, oh, I'm totally fine. There's no meaning. Right? It's like, but it's
or conclusion.
yeah, exactly.
that's the
To
same
me,
thing,
it's
yeah.
like a meaningfulness that's even richer. You know, it's like it's juicier. It's more. It's not a diminishment of the meaningfulness. That's what the funny thing. If you deconstruct the human meaning, so that's just an idea.
Totally.
And then we end up with something greater than that, not something less than that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're afraid of. Oh my God, this is going to be like us. Make this like somehow meaningless and terribly dark and negative. It's completely opposite.
Well, that's kind of like a death thing. Like if your
Right.
idea of meaningless
Yeah.
is much worse than the
Right.
experience
The actuality
of
of
meaning.
Exactly. Yeah. We freak ourselves out
Yeah,
by our ideas.
okay, so it's meaningless. So then what? Where does that leave you?
Right here.
Right.
Where you've always been.
Because meaninglessness is interpreted as a journey, because it gets interpreted through the lens of a journey that needs to go to get somewhere.
Right.
And when you look at the meaninglessness through that lens, it's terrifying because that means there's no journey.
Right.
But if you just experience it without an idea of some kind of journey, then it's like, what's the big deal?
I was thinking about that at lunch, and like, if you just notice, like, the only thing that's ever occurring, which is that immediacy, is there's no narrative, like there's no story associated with it.
Mhm.
It doesn't. So you can't even string anything together. It's just. So all those stories of the journey, and I'm here, and I'm going somewhere that's better than here, and that's just all a narrative that doesn't hold water when we just investigate what's actually here, just this.
And it's kind of like the thing he was saying last, which is it may have the appearance of a journey and all of that, but it doesn't hold up to close scrutiny. Yeah.
Nothing does. That's what's amazing. Nothing does.
Yeah. So it doesn't negate a journey,
No,
but at the same time, it's like
it's just like a body doesn't hold up to scrutiny either, but it doesn't negate this thing
what
called
this
body.
thing is.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, you're having a baby. It's like, well, what is having a baby? It's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't. It's like it's a mystery. It's a determinate mystery.
Yeah.
Totally. And you're already looking at it.
Yeah.
It's like, and yeah, you're gonna have a baby. You know?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like you get to have your cake and eat it too. You know, it's like you still get to have all the apparent, all the apparition, but when you see that it's like, it's not what we imagine it is. It's just, again, it doesn't make it less. It makes it actually more of our imagination is paltry compared to
Right.
how astonishing it actually is, right?
Because
Way
we've
beyond.
seen through the confines of whatever framework you're in.
Yeah, which is always going to be limited by the finiteness of conceptualization.
Yeah.
So I could never possibly imagine infinity because it's infinite, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to be the infinite nature that must be greater than my imagination. Right?
When I imagine infinity, I imagine like a wide expanse of space, but
Right, but that's
is
cool.
it a wide expanse of space? I don't know.
No, it's much.
Right?
No, it's beyond that.
Yeah.
It's-
That's what blows me, like, even me, like, a few years ago. Infinity, well, it's like a linear time that just keeps on
keeps on
going,
going, yeah.
or a linear space that keeps on, it's like,
Right.
but what if there's no observer to see the, or what, whatever, like, idea.
Yeah, always. The way it is always wild and more than whatever we could possibly conceive. Yeah. Richer, deeper, more amazing, more astonishing.
That's her experience. She exists. I'm sure.
Again,
Her experience is true to her.
that's good for.
So I'm sitting with all these, like, why do these things happen to people?
Yeah.
That was great having you guys there.
Yeah, it was nice stuff. Nice group of people.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
What hope is there if like, things just happen to us? How do I have hope if these
It's
things
been
are
fun.
just happening and there's no reason? Then how can I have hope?
Yeah.
They're wonderful.
Right. Yeah, it's a cool format.
Here and there. Yeah, let's see.
Also start with whatever we're gonna do.
Right, yeah, it's a little bit off.
How about you?
Hi, Jim.
I've been seeing him for a long time, but he used to come more often.
Oh, to here or?
Yeah, to here.
Oh,
And she was-
yeah. Or the
Well, she's at the beginning of it,
Okay.
Yeah. Mostly I like live around.
Yeah.
and she can
San
still
Francisco.
witness what
This area.
she knows.
I have a teacher named David Sarah who is channels high frequency energy, maybe 7-chakra energy. That's not what he says he does, but that seems to be what he does. And he talks about consciousness. Which most teachers do. My experience is just bringing down the entire energy. But he didn't go to Sedona, Arizona. And so he was on.
You can feel yourself.
Yeah.
Law of attraction.
Yeah.
Probably was
It's all just happening. We don't even believe in that.
David Sparrow. He cleaned his house for a while.
Yeah. How's that?
No, not
Something, we have.
And he trusted me to be the one to find the dirt.
Neither of us have had a dog as an adult. Not having children is something.
You see anybody else?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Peter?
It's pretty big dog.
Yeah, big dog.
Yeah, I get through.
Well, I had a period when I Ashanti the thousand.
And
They started out with somebody
so
named
we're both getting, both
Horizon.
actually.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
This was probably
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
When I was young, he would have a national. College.
I like I saw him
Like it's also writing songs.
Really? They just go, they go into
This stuff is going on.
yeah. Yeah, they've always wanted
No, it's her general way of just sort of going. Getting fascinated by it. Yeah.
And he's really like, it was like 100%. But the girlfriend and the drummer got in a fight, and his girlfriend came out of town.
Yeah.
So he was like 3 or 4 copies. Produced. So now no, I just story. I remember the story. He's always still treating. Go to these
I just said something called.
Lily says hello from Australia.
Oh, wonderful. How's she doing? Wonderful.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Welcome back. So what haven't we covered? We haven't covered anything. Oh, okay, good. That makes it easy. Let's start over.
Yeah, start at the end again.
Work our way back.
Well, it's interesting because when you start at the end and start at the beginning, you're actually starting at the same place. Because where you end up actually turns out to be exactly where you started from. Because the condition that this is what it is before the investigation. During the investigation is what it is. And after the investigation still is what it is. So after all of that, you end up being exactly where you were when you started. But ideally, you may recognize that. You may develop some subtlety and appreciation in the course of this exploration. Which doesn't really matter, but it can be satisfying. Liberation isn't important, but it lets you appreciate that you didn't need to do it. You know, the point of any spiritual practice is to discover that you didn't need to do it. You meditation, you become an expert meditator, and when you really have gotten the point of meditation, you see that you didn't need to do it. Because what you achieve from meditation turns out to be the condition that existed before you started the meditation. This is related to what I started this afternoon with, which is that it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what this seems to look like. What matters is what it is. So in meditation, you know, you may start before you begin meditation, you know, you're a spiritual newbie saying, oh, it's the spirituality stuff. Wonder what it is. Maybe I'll learn to meditate. And you start meditating and your mind's racing around and you're like, wow, how do you do this stuff? My mind's all over the place. And you meditate and you meditate and you meditate and your mind seems to quiet down, whatever, and you experience at some subtler levels of whatever. And at the end of the day, you quiet your mind, but is a quiet mind different than a noisy mind? Well, it's a different flavor. You know, but it's not fundamentally different what it is. You know, is a romantic TV show different than a violent TV show? Sure, it's different in its flavor, but it's just a TV show. It's just light on the screen. Does it matter? It really doesn't. If you prefer one or the other, by all means try to get to the one or the other. But you aren't actually hitting anything. Because what it is exactly the same thing. Of course, as humans, we're very expert at ignoring what it actually is and paying attention only to what it seems to be, what it looks like. But it turns out, through yoga, if you pay attention to what it is, you will have a surprising discovery. It proves to be a valuable exploration.
So it's kind of, where it's going all over the place, whatever. So it's kind of like doing a documentary in a way. I think I want to be a better driver. So I'm going to go see Peter. He's going to talk about this, clarity equaling unresolvability, and as weird as that is. So I'm going to be a better, and lo and behold, halfway through the documentary, I could care less about driving. When I get to unresolvability, suddenly driving takes care of itself.
Right. So you take up spirituality with the hopes of self-improvement and clarifying your mind and making the chicks more interested in you and all this stuff.
Right.
And then you embark on spirituality, and at the end you don't care about any of that stuff.
Right.
But you get liberated from it.
But that can't happen until it's clear what it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't know that it doesn't matter until you discover that it doesn't matter. So then you think it matters even though it never did.
And all those things that matter suddenly are there but different.
Yeah, nothing gets negated.
Right.
You know, that's the interesting thing about yoga. Everything that is in your life when you begin the spiritual path is exactly what you have at the end of the spiritual path. But at the end of the spiritual path, you know what it is. Beginning of the spiritual path, you think it's something else. You think your life consists of all these details and all these problems and all these issues and all this, that, and the other. At the end of the spiritual path, you have this absolute present divinity, which happens to look exactly like all your problems and all the details and all the aspects of your life.
I'm a pretty good driver, by the way. I just want
You say that.
Okay, I know.
You say
I go
that.
to Los Angeles. I'm like,
Officer, really, I'm usually a good driver. You must have sneezed.
But those problems you just mentioned, they may not look like problems afterwards, right?
Exactly. You see that they aren't the problems you thought they were. They may not have gone anywhere, but you see what they actually are. So, an example, say you're being chased by a crocodile, and you're on a lonely road, and the road is very muddy, so you can't run very fast, you're slipping. But the crocodile doesn't slip because it can run really well in mud. So the crocodile's chasing you, zany on you. Big problem, what am I gonna do, what am I gonna do, what am I gonna do? And all of a sudden you realize you're dreaming. The crocodile might not go anywhere. The running away may not go anywhere, but all of a sudden you're seeing the problem in a whole new light. And this is very analogous to spiritual discovery. The problems don't necessarily go away, but you discover they aren't actually the problems you thought they were. Because you're not actually the being you thought you were. You're not a dependent, vulnerable individual in a chaotic situation that you're vulnerable to, that you need to defend yourself from. You're actually this whole system. And so the importance of these various apparent situations can shift drastically. Like when the crocodile's chasing you and you discover you're dreaming, you know, it's not that you've eluded the crocodile, it's just you discover you're not really the body in the dream. So if the crocodile hits it, it's not going to hurt you.
But you kind of have to do the math to see that clearly, right? Like, you can't.
Well, I think I may have said something like that a few times. I can't really remember, but it's possible.
But the other thing you say can really be misheard, which is like when you do it, you realize you didn't have to do it to begin with.
Yeah.
But that doesn't negate the fact that you.
It doesn't mean you didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
And yet you don't.
Right.
And most people don't.
It's the paradoxical thing.
Yeah.
Peter, do you then process, when you see things clearly, do you process simple things like pain and anxiety differently though, once you see that having pain or no pain is really essentially the same?
Yeah.
So are you?
I wouldn't say, I don't know if I'd use the word process, but what you mean by that word process, the answer is yes.
And then therefore, does that, your experience of pain, for example, change? Like,
Yes.
It's not as.
Well, yes and no.
You still feel the sensations and everything of
Sure.
course of pain, but then you're not, is it more like you're not as identified or attached or like
Yeah.
resistant of it or?
Yeah. Sure.
but it doesn't make it go away. Like,
No.
it's still arises.
Well, it may or may not, because the attachment and resistance makes the it and the presentness more magnified.
That's what I'm getting at. I'm really seeing and learning that the overlay of like a concept of pain, or what a fantasy of what anxiety
Yeah.
is, or what it could be linked to or caused by, is actually really
Yes.
magnifying.
Most of the suffering of pain is not from the sensation of the pain. It's from the idea, from the dread and the hatred of the pain. You know, so I feel the pain and I think, I don't want this, I don't want this, I have to get away from it, it's horrible, help me. So that's, all of that drama is what's making the intensity and the suffering. The pain is just a sensation that's there, that may be the basis of all that. But without all of that, the pain would just be this weird sensation present in the experiential field.
Yeah, like I'm experimenting with, like, you know, days that I'm depressed, you know, and then I get into a story and then it like really makes it worse. Like,
Yeah,
I get
exactly.
into it. Versus when I don't have the story, then it's,
Yeah, because emotional reaction is always to an interpretation, always to a story, not to the phenomena itself. It's impossible to have an emotional reaction to experiential phenomena. The emotional reaction is always to the story about the phenomena.
So do you ever get to the point where the phenomenon is just purely like unlabeled and it's just sensations? Like, even if it's like horrible, deep anxiety inside your gut, like, does it even feel?
That can happen, but it doesn't need to happen.
Yeah.
But you get to the point where even if there is a story, you know it's just a story. So the story may be present, but it's just a story, so it doesn't have any importance.
Do you ever get to the point where the sensations then become, like, initially it would be horrible and then it could turn pleasant without the story?
Sure.
Like,
Anything can happen. It can look like anything.
So, let's say there's a sensation of disconnect.
Right.
I'll call it a sensation.
Sure.
And I think, well, it's a sensation of disconnect, and I'm going to investigate that. And that can open up like a nest of bees of preconceived notions about what I am.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the notion I had about the discomfort of the
Yes, yes.
But that's freaky. That's
Yeah.
where depression really comes in. It's like suddenly, holy shit, I have to redo the whole thing.
Yeah.
But nothing has to be redone, but the concept is.
Yeah. But
building
what you touch on is a really interesting point. It's a very interesting principle. Any thought implies a whole worldview. Any thought implies an entire world and its inhabitant. Any thought defines your entire situation. So if I think, oh, this hurts, I don't want it, all of a sudden there's the pain, there's the me, there's the world that is happening, and the whole world, the whole universe is defined by one seed concept. So it's very peculiar.
To say the least.
And it's making it seem so easy to get out of it once you get that. Like, some people can get stuck in this cycle for years and years of like, this, I am me, there is this depression, there is.
Yeah, it can be very easy to see that no interpretation is true. It can also seem to be impossible to see that. It's always possible to see it, in fact, because it's always true. And since it's true, it's possible to see it. On the other hand, being able to see it is something that happens or not.
Right. I see how that's like a really good point, because lately I've been like dealing with this thing where it's like, oh, this guy isn't being a very good friend, but that statement in itself rests on an entire worldview of, oh, there is a me that should have friends. friends, and there's people that are not friends, and
Yeah.
what is a good friend? It's just
all that,
like,
all that.
it's
It's,
super
yeah,
freaking convoluted.
Yeah. exactly. And if you look at any element of that whole huge elaborate narration and see what it really is, the element dissolves as actually being that. And as that dissolves, the entire narration can dissolve.
That's why I like to say, like, enjoy it while it lasts. I would, like, keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Keep it real.
Yeah, enjoy it.
Keeping it real.
Never made
The struggle is real.
Well, there's a great sense of freedom that we talked about earlier in that analogy that you gave in regard to one, we have a thought about something and that's another, and a belief and interpretation, and then
Yeah.
that whole universe of that is
Yeah.
kind of carrying that. And to just be able to get in touch with one part of that,
Yeah.
even not
Yes.
even the whole string,
Right.
like Henry was talking about. It's like just one, really in touch with one aspect of that, then the others just fall.
Yeah, the whole chain
Yeah.
melts.
That's the one problem is
Yeah.
that I'm not looking at it, and the solution is just to look.
Yes, exactly so. Things can only convincingly seem to be a certain way in terms of a narrative if you're not looking closely. It's that simple. If you look at an experience very closely, very sensitively, and presently and intelligently, you will discover that you can't tell what anything is exactly. And in that discovery, obviously, any knee-jerk thought that it is a certain way is seen to be simplistic, and hence inaccurate, and hence untrue. And if it's not true, why react to it? Why care at all? And this is always the case, because experience itself is entirely beyond interpretation. Just, if nothing else, just for being, too much information, too dynamic, too instantaneous, too continually changing. So all these interpretations consist of oversimplifications. And when you look at how rich experience is and how unsimple it is, these oversimplifications are obviously inaccurate. They're obviously incomplete, and hence false, hence not true.
Yeah, it amazes me how complex my oversimplifications can be.
Oh yeah. Infinite elaborations of oversimplified stupidity. The mind is very clever.
But it feels like a conspiracy to teach you exactly. It's like, it feels like, ooh, I'm going to try this one on her just to see if she really gets it.
Well, in effect, it could be said to be that.
Well, Trump is proof.
Oh, no.
I don't mean to be that, but
No, that's fine.
That's so weird. It's like, yeah.
I have no problem with Trump. I think he's a hoot.
Yeah.
Don't tell him I said so.
Teaching me a lot. I'll tweet.
The best.
It's the unreality.
We started this whole retreat talking about how there's always a coexistence of these seeming two worlds. The world of interpretation, the world that you think things consist of, and the actual world of experience that is always fully present, and yet is completely intrinsically uninterpretable. And you're always in these two worlds. And the spiritual challenge is you're not aware there are two worlds. Typically, consensus reality orientation you're seeing both these worlds as if they were one. You see your interpretations of, oh, I'm in a room and I'm talking to people and they're sitting in chairs and all that, as if it was actually true, and as if this was that. So, you know, in the course of analysis, you discover that, wait a minute, there is this interpretation that's present, there is this direct experience that's present, but they're different from each other. The interpretation is based upon definability, differentiability, and relative simplicity. Experience is not definable, you know, is not differentiable, and is certainly not relatively simple. It's infinitely subtle and complex and rich. So, you know, when you notice this, then these two worlds are seen as having nothing to do with each other, even though they coexist. At that point, you're able to investigate, become more familiar with the uninterpretable world of direct experience, and doing so will reveal and inherently invalidate the truth of all the interpretations that the mind comes up with. At which point you will probably gradually, but eventually, be orienting more fully to your actual experience than to your experience through the interpretation, which is a more typical consensus reality way of human doing things. You know, initially, we don't even know that they are. We think the interpretation and the experience are one and the same. You know, it's just a simplistic belief that, oh, the interpretations are pretty true. They're more or less true. I have a handle on things. You know, but if you look closely, that quickly becomes invalidating.
To the interpreter, it sounds like Kool-Aid. You know, it's like that's the Kool-Aid for the interpreter. However, as you pointed out with the little go-on story that I came up with, as you point out, the painting continues.
Right.
The interpreter remains. It's just,
sure.
You're not going to just, you're going to show up differently. That's all.
Yeah, it's just its relevancy is diminished. But the fact is that the event of it is not necessarily changed at all. The mind's going to continue spinning off its hypotheses. But there seem to be hypotheses rather than being validly accepted as the truth. You know, the mind endlessly comes up with versions of things. And if you buy into that, you're just going to be swept hither and yon. Whereas when you notice that all these versions of things are just hypotheses, they're, maybe it's like this. You know, if you put the word maybe before any thought, thinking would be a lot clearer. Because that's the truth of it. The mind comes up with a hypothesis. Maybe this is a spiritual talk. Maybe we're here to do something. Maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other. What's really happening? I don't know. Maybe. But you can't ever come down, you can't ever eliminate the maybe. You can't ever say, yes, it is. Because if you look at the actual experience, you can't pin down what it is. Is this a clarifying spiritual talk? Is this manipulative hypnotic brainwashing? Is this a scam? Is this, you know, the most sacred celebration of the present divinity? Different ways of spinning it. But it is what it is, and it doesn't have to conform to any of these ways of spinning it. Look, let me crack the door a little bit. There's a little stuff in here, you mean? Okay, thanks.
Is getting out of time half the battle?
Well, you don't need to get out of time. You just see that time isn't what you simplistically think it is. When you see only the present moment exists, and time again is a hypothesis to explain what we call memory and to explain what we call anticipation, both of which are present events. So both of which are aspects of the present. You know, memory is simpler to explain if you suppose it relates to a past that really happened. But you can't verify that. You cannot. The intelligence should be so powerful that it's actually making up the past in real time.
Well, it kind of does.
Well, in a way it kind of does, but maybe it totally does. But you can't answer that question one way or the other. You can't know. No, check it out. I mean, it's trippy. It's pretty far out, but check it out. But it's not important whether or not it does. It's all just hypothesis anyway. It's theories. All you have is the fact, and you can't pin down what it is. But you don't need to pin it down because you have it. You are it. It's already a done deal. It's not dependent upon you making sense of it.
Yeah, memory is interesting because it feels more concrete, but I think it feels more concrete because you can get some consensus from other people about it rather than speculation about the future or some seeming consensus.
Yeah, but then the consensus is a funny phenomenon too. Yeah, consensus is dependent largely upon the fact that people use the same words. So let's say you have a word salty and I use the word salty too. So let's say we both tasted a dish at dinner. And yet I don't know what your experience of salt is. You don't know what my experience of salt is. Salt may taste to you like what I think sugar tastes like. And vice versa. How could you know? How could I know? But we might both agree that the dish is salty because we use this word salty. So we're using the same word, and the assumption is, therefore, we're referring to the same thing, but not necessarily. Because you can't know what another person's experience is. So even though they're using the same words that seem to agree with your words, you don't know that their experience actually agrees with yours. I say the sky is blue, you say, yeah, the sky is blue, of course it is. But the sky may look to you like what I think chartreuse is, and vice versa. How could we know? You can't know what another person experiences. The assumption is, well, yeah, but we're probably experiencing all the same. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Colorblind person experiences differently, certainly. And yet what they experience is normal, and they can't know what I experience. Vice versa. Maybe everyone has their own version of colorblind, but since we all use the same words for the same things, we think we're all agreeing. How can you know?
So I just wanted to say for myself,
Okay.
concluding that this is like an analysis of our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, the reality depends on that quality of thoughts that we have.
Yeah, our experience of reality does. Yeah, what we think it is. Yes.
Yes. So it only depends on us.
Yes.
To what to do with that reality.
Yes. To investigate whether or not how accurate your thoughts are, and maybe you have. It's possible you may assume your thoughts are more accurate than they are. So if you investigate what your experience actually is, you can discover the ways in which your experience is different than the thoughts and words we have about it. Because experience is richer than thoughts are. Thoughts are simple, and experience is very rich. So if you can notice that your thoughts are an oversimplification, then perhaps you can appreciate the richness of experience better, and both from the point of view of appreciation as well as participating in it more multidimensionally.
I think that my thoughts were more powerful than the reality.
Yeah,
That is the opposite.
exactly, of course. But the thoughts, if they're worth anything, have to be about reality. If they aren't about reality, then they're just fantasy. So, of course, reality is the most important. And of course, the reality is the reality of your experience. And experience has many aspects which can't be thought about, which we don't have words for, but which is present, which is actual. And so when you notice this richness of experience, then you can acknowledge that your thinking is simplifies. Thinking always simplifies. Situations are rich and complex, but thought is simple. Thought always simplifies. And it makes things seem simpler than they are. It's like people who are prejudiced. They say, all people of a certain race are a certain way. But the experience isn't like that. Everyone's different. And it has nothing to do with race, for example. So the thought is an oversimplification, whereas the experience gives evidence that it's not really like that. So therefore the thought is wrong. And, all thinking is very similar to that. All thinking is in that same category.
Imagine if you had to try to write anything about a salty taste to someone who has no taste.
Sure.
You'd never finish. And
Sure.
you would never capture it.
Sure. Or, someone who has lived, suppose a person who's native to the South Pacific 200 years ago and they've never seen ice. And they're talking to an Eskimo. And the Eskimo's talking about ice. And this person is like, what are they picturing? Well, it's this hard thing that water turns into. It's like, water doesn't turn into a hard thing. So who knows what they're in the picture? They can't imagine it. You know, the experience is what's actual. The thoughts are just fantasy.
What are thoughts?
Hmm?
What are thoughts?
Exactly. What are thoughts? We have this word thoughts. What does they refer to? I mean, there's a really obvious weirdness for you. Try and pin down what thought is. What's thought made of? How does it appear? What is it? You know. I mean, it's obvious that something is occurring when I say thought is present, but what exactly is occurring? And wow, I mean, especially at that.
Talk about subtlety.
Yeah.
So one more thing.
Of course.
It's about how the pain of others affects us.
Yes.
Why we let it happen.
Yes.
How we can help both with
Well, if you think that someone else is in pain and you wish to be benevolent, to be helpful with them, you do whatever you can according to what you suppose might be helpful. But you can't really know exactly what they're feeling. You can imagine, well, if I was in that situation and I was behaving like that, it would be like whatever. But you can't know exactly how it is for them. Because you can't know what another person's experience is like, because you can't see through their eyes. You know, you can't be in their world. But still, you're free to, if you believe in being helpful to people and being benevolent, then you're free to do that as best you are able, according to your inspiration, to your wishes.
and accepting that without suffering that the other person is having a hard time.
Sure. You can see they seem to be having a hard time, and you can't know exactly what that is, but you can try to be benevolent. But you can't ever tell exactly what's happening, and you can't ever tell even if your help will be helpful. Maybe you try to help, but maybe it's not effective. Maybe it doesn't help. Maybe it even makes the situation worse in some way. Who knows? All you can do is the best you can do. But since we can't really know completely what's happening, we can't know completely every detail of what the situation actually is, then the best we can do is just our best. And maybe it's better, maybe not so good. In these talks, I try to speak with people in a way that will be stimulating or perhaps clarifying for them, but maybe not. Maybe what I say confuses someone. Maybe I speak clumsily. Maybe I don't speak clearly. I can't know, but all I can do is to try to do the best that I can, and I can't do better than that.
Well, for hypnotic brainwashing, you're doing pretty good.
Says you. Although I think you're probably an authority on that topic.
Sorry, I've been meaning to crack that one since you brought it up.
Bada boom.
Yeah.
Well, the day's getting on, and I know people are getting a little burned out. There's two choices I offer. One is we could take a 5-minute break and try and move another half hour out of this, or we could bail in 10 minutes or so. If you feel like it's, enough's enough. Stop!
That's
So
real half hour, that's it.
you want to,
I'll speak up since yesterday we got preempted.
okay, there's the yay. Any nays? Okay, let's take another 5-minute break and then we'll stretch it out a little longer.
Oh, did you go?
Yeah.
Surprised, I heard people get. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my mother.
This one? Oh, yeah. Which represents what? Well, they say that's a shoot too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
14%.
What year was that? No, the Spanish.
Oh.
Yeah, but not again.
Like for 2-3 years.
How did they do all that? Because they have the Philippines.
No, we didn't have to.
They did it for Spanish.
Yeah, they did. And
And
all South America,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, they would start something.
yeah, so there's a lot of.
So kind of the negative way of cutting through delusion.
Yeah. He was called Ace, so he's on the top of the card.
I don't know why it's everything there right now. It's
That's your first job.
That's when you want to get the baby.
Can you get my shoulder like a nice spot?
Spend $2,000.
Get off the chair. And then I didn't really need her, but then I think the more I was using it at home, it was just getting like, does that make sense? So I don't think I should use it. Is it just here?
Well, those are two spots.
It has to be
And
like.
there's at least two more.
Find out. Are you gonna want to? But I wanna, I'll like. It's like one of those, it's really tense. It goes like this, and it goes down, all the way, slide down. But I noticed she's like, what the hell's happening? But I really like it. I don't get to have back massage. But I guess there's some.
It's 50 credits.
But it's really nice.
We got Charlie here, he's the pro.
I got his number.
That's
Like this.
Oh, yeah. I see, she likes the chair, I still like the human contact.
They really getting rid of some people at this locale.
You finished recording,
Sitting is quite different. We only did it.
Oh, really? Yeah. Even on the thing? With your face and that.
Yeah. Up close and personal. Most of it is.
It's similar, but it's less oriented towards what happened and more oriented towards what experience is. But it's very much related to, it's similar in that it's related to the relationship between thoughts and actuality, and seeing the way in which thoughts aren't necessarily completely accurate with actuality.
Yeah.
Which can be very useful because most of us are used to thinking that our thoughts are more or less true. But when you notice that maybe there's maybe not, they're not, maybe they're not, maybe they're a little sloppy, maybe they're not quite true. That's valuable.
Depending on the experience.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Cell, TSCL?
Yes,
I don't really know what it refers to, but it sounds.
it means radiance.
Okay.
Pretty exactly. It's a Dzogchen word. It refers to the energy of apparition, the fundamental energy of apparition. The way that the absolute, that nothingness shines forth as anything. So,
That referred to shadow. Yeah. I know that's what it translates to.
oh yeah? Interesting.
Yeah.
I never looked at correlation. But that's interesting because it's resonant.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're back, we're bad. Well, maybe not so bad. We're keeping it real. It kind of keeps itself real, so, you know, we're sort of off the hook in that department. Most people spend more of their time trying to keep it unreal, which is a noble attempt, but it doesn't really work.
So it seems like we are all actors. If we don't.
Sure, in a way, absolutely.
So we are not real. We are actors.
Well, we are real in the way we think we are, because what we are is beyond our ability to think. Because thought simplifies, and we're not simple.
Is there anything you can say about subtlety and its finer points, more subtle points of subtlety?
Well, subtlety by its very nature reaches beyond unsubtlety. So whatever things seem to be at let's say at a more superficial observation or more superficial perspective, when you're with the actuality more subtly, more intimately, you discover it's more and different than it seemed to be from the more superficial level of observation. Now, since there's infinite subtlety, anything that seems to be a certain way can seem to be different at another level, and different than that at another level of observation, different than that, without end. So there's no actual final way anything is, because what it seems to be depends upon how it's looked at.
Just non-resolution.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You know, human consensus reality is based upon not looking at things very closely, which enables heavy-handed oversimplifications of thought to seem to be true. And then you have politics and these knee-jerk slogans and all these things that are sort of more or less held to be true by people who don't examine them closely. But one who examines things a little more closely, looks at the subtleties involved and say, wait a minute, things are a little bit more complex than this is being said here. And so that immediately invalidates these simplistic slogans. But then you look at that newly discovered subtle realm even closer, and you discover even more subtlety, and it's different than it was previously. So it's this endless, looking with more subtlety is an endless moving into newness and difference than you were. So whatever you think is going on a simple basis, if you look at it closely, it turns out to be different than you thought because it's more complex and more subtle. And you look at that closer, and it's even different than that, and so on forever. Which is why conceptual thought is always inaccurate, because everything is always more subtle than any level of analysis, no matter how profound and subtle the level of analysis is. You could always go to the next level of subtlety, and you would have invalidated your previous perspective. And this is essentially the practice of yoga, looking at your actual experience and noticing it's more subtle than your interpretations are. And as soon as you do that, with any depth at all, you've invalidated the world that you thought you lived in. You've invalidated your narrative, your story of who you are and what's going on. And then it becomes a voyage of exploration of, wow, what is this world? What is happening here? What am I? What is this? And of course, it'll seem to be a certain way, but then the saga continues. You develop more subtlety, and all of a sudden, everything's new yet again. And of course, the great discovery, the great revelation is there's no bottom. There's no actual final way that things even are. It's just endless perspectives, endless difference.
So in that same vein, do you want to talk about simplicity?
Well, it depends what you mean by that word.
I guess I don't know, so I'd like you to tell me.
That's passing the buck.
Yeah.
Well, simplicity turns out not to be the opposite of complexity. Actuality, experience, is infinitely complex if you look at the details and the differences and the various aspects of it. It's a vast array of just amazing elements and all that, which are all different than each other from any given perspective. And yet, it's all essentially one system. It's all essentially one thing. So it's all essentially simple in that sense. But it's not, but the simplicity and the complexity are two ways of putting the same thing. This condition is that. It's complex if you look at it in terms of analyzing aspects. It's simple if you look at it in terms of seeing what it actually is as a system. But if it first, flies in the face of the ordinary logic, the complexity and simplicity are opposites. If it's simple, then it's not complex. If it's complex, it's not simple. But reality, as usual, is paradoxical. So if you throw one extreme at it, it also, lo and behold, includes the other extreme.
it seems like when one hears something like that and just entertains it, just takes it in, being open, there's something else going on there that's totally beyond words, that sort of, I don't want to say organizes itself, but it definitely seems to have some sort of pattern or informing or something.
Yeah.
Totally beyond words.
Sure.
And you can feel it just sort of.
This is what I call the inherent intelligence. There's a fundamental intelligence that is intrinsic to being itself. You could say intrinsic to consciousness, if you like. That is not rational and not dependent upon process. It is an instantaneous knowing that yet is capable of assimilating infinite complexity in profound, meaningful ways. And this intelligence is the very intelligence that perceives. It's the intelligence that enables all of the incredible complexity of the sensory information and mental information and other extrasensory information to be instantaneously present and assimilated fully in the instant without process, without dependence upon time or processing time or anything like that, or logic. It's like an instantaneous knowing of profound inclusiveness and meaningfulness.
You can sort of feel its movement.
Yes, seemingly, sure.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, this intelligence that does yoga, it's not the rational intelligence. So, for example, in these kinds of talks, we use a lot of words which seemingly refers to and employs the rational intelligence. But what we're referring to has nothing to do with that, you know, because it's only the inherent intelligence which is capable of perceiving what this is. The rational intelligence will always be trying to see it in terms of dualities, and it itself is not dual. It itself is in itself is a both and. It's a paradoxical exclusiveness of all extremes, of any differences. So that's why the rational logic is incapable of assimilating actuality. But the inherent intelligence is infinite. So it's very comfortable with paradox. It's very comfortable with both and. That's its native mode. So, you know, a large part of yoga is settling into the inherent intelligence and functioning from that, rather than identifying with and functioning with the rational intelligence. Or if you want to put it in pop psychological terms, you could say it's settling into, orienting from, and functioning from the unconscious mind, rather than functioning from the conscious mind of identification and definition of who one is, and so on and so forth.
And that comes with the feeling.
Sure, comes with everything. It's just everything. Please.
So how we connect the reality, the moment, the present, with spirituality? Because spirituality seems like a fantasy.
Well, most spirituality that people are familiar with is a fantasy. It's mythology and stories, you know, stories of the afterlife or angels or these various things. But the true spirituality is the actual nature of the moment, which turns out to be transcendental in its nature. You know, this is here, reality is here, experience is here, and it's a mystery. It's a fundamental mystery. It's here, but you can't see how it's here. You can't see what's putting it here. You can't see where it is even. Here's your experience, but where is it? What's it in? So the mysterious nature of this is its transcendental nature, which is, you could say, what spirituality is all about. So the moment, the actuality, the immediate concrete actuality is actually the transcendental, is actually the spiritual. What spiritual really is, not the usual spiritual, which is a lot of stories and fantasies and mythology. We'll take about another 15 or 20 minutes. So any last minute issues that are burning in your mind that haven't been touched on yet, now's your opportunity.
How am I going to get all these people to Los Angeles?
How big is your car?
What about like coincidences or, I bet it's like interpretation, but like within your field of experience, you might see signs for something.
Sure.
And there's coincidence.
Sure.
What about that?
Well, there's nothing but. There is synchronicity in the sense that everything happens inclusively in the instant, and everything happens in relation to everything else with an infinite degree of meaningfulness. So the rational mind may not be capable of making sense of that, but everything is meaningfully, inextricably existing with everything else in a context of profound intelligence and meaningfulness. In other words, another way to put it is everything is the way it is with precision and with deliberateness. On the other hand, the rational mind looks at all this and tries to make sense of it, and it's like, good luck. That's not going to happen. The rational mind needs really obvious, stupid things to have its nose rubbed in the fact that everything is a synchronicity.
Is there like guidance through synchronicities?
Well, there's guidance through intelligence, and synchronicity reveals intelligence. We touched on this a couple of times during this weekend. I don't know, some of it may have been yesterday when you weren't here, but there's intuition, insight. There's all these kinds of various non-rational, intelligent knowings that can occur in experience, and that is guidance. And synchronicities are, a reflection of in experiential qualities of this same potential for insight, for meaningfulness. Because the true meaningfulness is not rational. True meaningfulness is not like where you say, oh, this means that. True meaningfulness is just some feeling or knowing of profundity that is relevant somehow. And in actuality, that's where we function from. If you look closely, the conscious mind may have a rationalization for why it's doing what it's doing, but it's all hogwash. You really do what you do because there's this fundamental sense of knowing that vectors you in towards the way you are, the way you function.
Peter, you said something yesterday about, see if I get this right, about noticing. I think about the going into it and the leaving of it.
Mhm.
The leaving of it maybe is more interesting. Did I get that right or more?
It's not more interesting, but, you know, you could say typically during the course of spiritual inquiry, during the course of yoga, there seems to be periods of sort of insight or deep revelation or what have you. And then there's other periods where you sort of drift out of that back into normalcy, back into some degree of dullness and so on. And this is a sort of cycle moving back and forth. And a newbie to yoga thinks of the insight as being good, and the drifting back into normalcy as being, oh, I've lost it, I've drifted out of it. But in actuality, this sort of moving back and forth is a mixing. It's an opportunity to discover directly and intuitively the way in which what's happening when there is revelation and insight is essentially and ultimately identical to what's happening when you think there isn't. To discover the essential sameness of all experience rather than the simplistic, you know, the insight is good and special and the normalcy is bad and dull and not special. That you know, the more naively might be held to be so.
Seeing that what just comes with experience, I guess.
Yeah.
You're just doing it more.
Yeah, time. Yeah, experience. You know, everyone has their own sort of timeline. Everyone has their own sort of speed of development or progression or what have you. And it's all ultimately unpredictable. So the thing is just to have at it and have at it, and it is what it is and does what it does. You know, people are not all the same. Everyone has unique resources and talents, and everyone also has unique blind spots and liabilities. And so it's the challenge of each individual to use their strengths to, in the context of their weaknesses, to effectively, you know, practice yoga, to effectively recognize. But so there's not any one recipe that applies to everyone because, again, people have different talents and different, you know, different blind spots.
But let's say you see yourself going back into so-called normalcy. Presumably, you wouldn't be behaving in the same way. You wouldn't be kicking the dog, you know, if you were seeing that this is all.
Yeah.
Not that you were kicking the dog before, you know.
Well, maybe you were. Whether or not, maybe you were a dog kicker. Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, like what you might call progress happens inevitably. And it can be, you know, in spirituality, it can be impossible to self-assess how well you're doing. You know, you can only really tell sort of over the long term of, you notice, wow, my experience has a really different sort of feeling tone than it did a few years ago. Even though superficially, there's maybe periods of insight and periods of dullness and so on and so forth, which may seem to be what's always been happening. So it ramps itself up sort of gradually and perhaps imperceptibly. Subtlety is developed without necessarily being recognized. It's kind of like the horizon. You can head towards the horizon, but the horizon seems to recede, so you always seem to be still as far from it. But in fact, you may be covering a lot of ground.
Yeah. And thinking about it, I'm not sure what real need there is to self-assess anyway. Right?
Exactly. Ultimately, there isn't. But there may be a tendency to do so.
You know, when you say this, the curiosity, or you know, you go from hunger or to Marin, and you know, it seems like it's just a random, chaotic creation of anything it wants to be.
Well, it certainly is anything it wants to be, but whether or not it's random, again, can't really be pinned down. it seems to be, in a certain sense, very purposeful and very synchronous. But you can't pin that down either.
Yeah.
So, the most you can kind of get to is it is what it is. It does what it does. And all bets are off in terms of what it's going to look like, or where it's going, or how it gets there.
You can't walk out of the movie.
The journey of life is fully and unavoidably a surprise.
You can walk out of this movie, right? I mean, you don't kill yourself.
Yeah, but does the movie end?
This is a different movie.
Maybe, but maybe this is a different movie in the next instant. Maybe it's already a different movie. I mean, but is it?
Totally different.
Maybe this is really, really different. You mean like really, 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 really? Add more really. He's not changing the channel, he's throwing paint on the TV. He's taking out a sledgehammer. All I can say is it'd be an interesting experiment. Try and see. Don't try this at home, kids. These are professionals.
Peter and Sargadot's saying about wisdom is design everything into a flow. Do you find that beyond poetic useful?
I find it poetry. Pretty poetry.
But love exists.
You can say that, certainly, absolutely, love exists. I would say there's nothing but love. Love is the harmony of everything. Everything is just in perfect harmony with itself, with everything else. And the things we recognize as love is the more obvious examples of that. But even the things we don't think of as love is still that.
From one point of view, it looks like absolute chaos rather than harmony. Sometimes,
Well, yeah, but again, when you're analyzing it rationally, chaos and harmony seem to be opposites. But this is, if you're looking for chaos, you find this. If you're looking for harmony, you find this. This is the same thing, whether you're calling it chaos or calling it harmony. So this is none of the above thing. It can seem to be either chaos or harmony, or both, or whatever. Yeah. And that's always the case with any kind of trying to pin this down as being this or that.
Including love, right? Including
sure.
Yeah.
If you're looking at love as contrasted to some non-love,
Why is the idea of specialness so pernicious? Because it creates some kind of dichotomy between every experience that's just this.
Interesting question. I think the idea of specialness is so pernicious because there's an implicit idea of situations that are problematic. And as soon as you have a situation that's problematic, you look for solutions. And as soon as you look for solutions, the solutions are special relative to the non-solutions, which are less special because you're not interested in them.
So the idea of me saying, okay, I'm not awakened, so I need to do something to awaken, and meditating or going to a talk is somehow more special than going to a rock concert.
Sure. So the specialness is created by your defining yourself as unawakened. which is based upon a defining, which is conceptual, and hence inaccurate.
I don't have a specific question around this, but I'm curious about what you could call ambrosia byproduct, or like a pollen that's created through yoga.
Yeah. I wouldn't say yoga creates ambrosia, but yoga reveals the self-nourishing and self-transformative nature of this. And in that revelation, it can seem as if it's creation because it's manifestly present, whereas before it may not have been recognized to be manifestly present. I mean, this nourishes itself, you could say, poetically speaking, transcendentally. Feeds itself transcendentally, waters itself transcendentally, all of which sort of fits into the symbolism of ambrosia. But that's already always the case, although one may not have recognized that. So yoga enables that recognition. It's like cities. Yoga reveals cities, but the cities were always there. Yoga just enables sufficient sensitivity to recognize the occurrence of that.
Did you say that yoga is being more efficient with that creativity?
What creativity? Yoga, per se, arguably is more efficient than normal life. All life is yoga. What we call human life, is a self-refining process. Even if it's being engaged in by very insensitive people, relatively let's say unsophisticatedly. Still in all, it's still the same self-refining process, although less efficient. Those of us that have capacity and stumble on the actual yoga, attempt to streamline the process and engage in it with maximal efficiency. But it's not ultimately a different process. So yoga per se enables maximizes the efficiency of the natural inherent life process of self-refining. Reality engages with itself as what we think of as experience or life, and this engagement is self-refining. By its very nature, is self-refining.
There seems to be this interesting notice over time of these many things that spiritual aspirants aspire to, these different characteristics, qualities, openness, love, equity, that these are discovered to be the nature of reality itself. But it seems it's interesting that look at something like openness, and you recognize that that's, you could say, one way to characterize the uncharacterizable is by nature, without bound. It's unbounded. It's open. Or you don't work. Then it feels as if we then somehow get to, I don't know, it's as if we get to kind of partake of those qualities in a sense through the recognition of them.
Yes, you have to partake of those qualities through the recognition of them. As you see what they are more refinedly, then you get to be with the fullness of what they are rather than be with the clumsy caricatures of them.
Right.
But it's subtle because whatever has been, put forth as the qualities of realization is largely a sales pitch because realization includes all qualities. Realization is openness, but all closeness is actually realization too. All stuckness, all obsession, all fixation.
But when you say, yeah, I would agree, but wouldn't you also say that if you take the unresolvable, it feels to me, maybe I'm saying it clearly, that if I were to attempt to characterize something about unresolvability as a kind of more primal quality to it, it feels like openness somehow captures an essence of it more than closedness, if you will. But closedness is, by its very nature, because it's unresolvable, is
right. It's subtle.
It's subtle, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, unresolvability because of the. I mean, an aspect of the nature of experience, the way we experience it on the human level, is the appearance of apparent perspectives, and the nature of perspectives is things appear to be the way they appear to be, a certain way, loosely from any given perspective. You shift perspective, things seem to be different. You know, you look at this room with one perspective, it's one thing. You go to sleep and you look at this room, it's a different perspective entirely, and so on and so forth. So all these perspectives reveal this range of differences. In unresolvability, one discovers that there is nothing but these perspectives. There's no hierarchy of these perspectives. They're all equally true, and they all coexist, and there's no limit to the amount of them, which can feel like an openness just by sheer volume, sheer amount of divergent possibility. And so that can be said to be openness. Yeah, but again, at the end of the day, any of these ways of putting it are partializations, and even though they may be meaningful or relevant to some extent, none of them are true.
But going along with that though, like if you see say people who are awakened, they predominantly are more loving, open, and kind. So it does tend towards some characteristics once you get in touch with what it actually is. Does that not?
I don't know. That may as a very, very sloppy rule of thumb be observed to be the case behaviorally, but the behavior doesn't necessarily reflect what it is. Anyway, it's time to quit. I want to thank all of you very much for joining me this evening. It's been wonderful fun for me, and it just felt really juicy, and I hope you found it at least interesting, if not provocative, if not valuable. So anyway, take care.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Hallelujah.